Thanks everybody for coming out to the webinar. We're excited that you guys could join us. I'm Brad Perry, the Director of Demand Generation at ObservePoint, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. We have the pleasure to hear from ObservePoint's Pat Hillery and Telium's Adam Corey as they take us through 7 steps to a successful tag management strategy. To give you a little background on the speakers, Pat Hillery is a solutions consultant with ObservePoint. Pat specializes in consulting, relationship management, and web analytics solution architecture. Pat was an analytics consultant at Adobe for 8 years, working as one of the first principal multi-product solution architects, where he deployed the full Adobe technology stack. During his tenure at Adobe, Patrick had the opportunity to consult for some of the world's largest and leading brands, including Dell and Facebook. Adam Corey leads Telium's marketing and partnership effort and is responsible for driving awareness through the power of Telium and cultivating alliances with best-of-breed customer data solutions. He has over 13 years of experience in digital analytics, marketing, and business development. Prior to joining Telium, Adam led the solution consulting groups at Upside and Crowd Factory, now part of Marketo. He also previously led technical production efforts at abcnews.com. So today we're going to go over these 7 steps to a successful tag management strategy. Pat will lead us through the last 3, and Adam will guide us through the first couple. After this, we'll open it up for Q&A. You can message us throughout the webinar using the control panel. There are also some handouts that are available for you to download that have both just Telium product overviews and also ObservePoint product overviews, as well as today's slides. So with that, we'll let Adam take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Really excited to join today's webinar and speak with you all. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules as we get to the end of the year, and really excited to tell you a little bit more about Telium. And I wanted to just talk a little bit for 30 seconds just to introduce Telium to those of you who haven't gotten a chance to meet us yet. Telium is the leader in tag management and customer data solutions, working with hundreds of enterprises around the world in all types of businesses. So oftentimes we think of tag management as being specific to one particular vertical or another, but really we all have the same needs that are inherent in tag management and vendor and data management. So our needs are really universal, and they're universal across organizations, and really they're universal across roles. Our background really from the founders and myself and others here at Telium is really in data and analytics. If you think about what tags are really meant to do, tags are really all about data. They're about transmitting data around. It's not about a JavaScript publishing engine. I often joke and roll my eyes at the acronym TMS because it's so closely related to CMS, which talks about managing content on your website. And when we think about tag management and managing just tags, that doesn't always tell the full story, because tag management is really about a lot more than just individual tags that are there. One other thing that I'll point out, which is available in a handout in today's presentation, is a little bit more information on our tag management product itself. We won't really be talking too much more about the product itself, but one point that I really wanted to hit on, just since we're right in the middle of the holiday shopping season for those of you who are B2C or perhaps have promotions or in the retail space. Last year at Cyber Monday was a huge day for Telium and also our customer base, experiencing record volume. And funny how a year goes by and what was a record volume then is no longer record volume even on a normal week for Telium. And in fact, this past Cyber Monday, we saw 3.4 billion tags that were served on that day alone. So again, not talking about tags on their own, since they're just one part of the equation, but think about the amount of data and customer experiences that are flowing through those. And so today's webinar will really focus on the best practices to building a successful tag management strategy throughout as you scale to these massive heights that we've seen in the industry so far. So we're going to start off today's presentation talking a bit about who owns tag management and how you should approach data governance when it comes to tag management. So one of my favorite concerns that sometimes comes up when we start to talk about tag management, and it can come from various parts of the organization. Sometimes it can come from the development side of the house, it can come from the analytics side of the house, as we talk about opening up the opportunity to update what's on the site and implement vendors, implement data strategies, even make changes to the customer experience. The concern always comes up with, am I giving marketing, or insert whatever other functional area you like to there, but am I giving marketing the keys to the kingdom? And so I think it's really important as we start to talk about ownership and data governance to really think about how proper tag management works within your existing workflow and life cycle. Because it's really what tag management is all about. It's not something that sits outside and is anti-workflow. It's really something that helps instill a great, agile, more flexible way to work together, but still has to adhere to what's important to your organization. Both your security requirements, your data governance and data control, your privacy needs, as well as your legal and other aspects that relate to where data goes and how it's handled by third parties. These are all really important when it comes into walking into a tag management strategy, but knowing that this is not something that sits outside. And if that's the approach, that's certainly not the approach that leads to the most successful tag management integrations. So as I hit on a moment ago, we all know tag management is not really about tags. Tags are not the means, or tags are really the means, not really the end there. They're really all about data. And I've loved, as I've really worked in tag management for the last several years, asking the question, maybe the naive question to start off saying, do you have a tag management problem? Or I hear people talk about, oh, I don't have a tag management problem. We don't have a tagging problem. And then invariably, when you dig into that a little bit, you understand that there are so many related problems potentially as it relates to, well, yeah, we really want to improve our analytics implementation. Yeah, it takes us a while to get new solutions implemented, or we'd really love to move forward with a testing strategy. So there are all these other ways, and oftentimes when we just talk about the word tags, we're getting in the way of ourselves. And more so, we're getting in the way of ourselves when we're trying to bring other people into the tag management workflow. So as we think about where the most successful tag management implementations really live, they're ones that are not necessarily owned by one particular group, because multiple groups throughout the organization really have a stake in, if not tags, the data that flows through those tags. These are the things that power their applications, send their data to Salesforce and Marketo and Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics, you name it. And this is really where they have a stake in understanding how their needs are met with tag management and how they fit into the greater picture. So as we drill in a little bit, let's first start off with talking about the data layer, because the data layer itself is really key. And for those of you that are maybe newer to the topic of a data layer, I'll define it for a moment. A data layer is really an abstracted set of data points that describe your web or customer experience. So if you take a page on your site, if you're a retailer, let's take a product page, for example. There's lots of great data that sits inside of that product page. I might have a product name. I might have a page name that may belong to a category. The product itself may have a SKU number. It may have a description. It may have a color, a size, a price. All sorts of information really describe that. And that's really the data layer itself. When we typically think about that data, most of the time we're thinking about it as it relates to my perhaps analytics vendor. And if I think about, again, I'll lean back on a retail experience for just a moment longer. If we think about one thing that happens in a successful e-commerce experience, I have a conversion rate or I have a conversion value. I get to the order confirmation page, I make a purchase, there's a value associated with that. Really important to not just the analytics person, but lots of people in the organization. So one of the things that's important about tag management and building a data layer is to help surface out all of those data points that exist that are important for the organization to describe the site, the product, the order, the customer experience. So that way there's one place that everything's defined and clarified, so that way I can ultimately control where that data goes. What vendors does it go to? Can I or do I want to enrich that with other information so that I can turn individual data layer elements into something more enriched, such as taking those order confirmation values, those conversion values, and looking at them over time to get a more of a lifetime value. These types of things then allow me to expand not only my tag management infrastructure, but really my data, my customer data infrastructure, to include really all aspects of the customer experience. So I can understand not just on my website what data layer exists there, but really at every point that I'm touching the customer digitally, in my mobile website, my mobile applications, maybe other Internet of Things, watches, etc. This is really when it becomes key to think not just in a vendor-centric manner about what data do I need to get to fulfill this implementation, but think about what data you really know about the experience or about that particular part. So who has a stake in tag management? You know, every organization is going to be different, but when we think about identifying the stakeholders that make a part of this, it really sits throughout. You have sales and marketing that are focused on revenue. Certainly analytics and business intelligence is key to this. It's really identifying who are the ones that are making requests using the applications that are embedded on the website and in our mobile experiences. I will insert the holiday joke here of make your list and check it twice. And hopefully you're not calling marketing or other people the ones who have been naughty. But this is really where you can drill in to understand who are the ones that have a stake, and certainly acknowledging the fact that not all of these people will play an equal role, but they certainly have needs, and starting with what applications currently sit in your tech stack that are implemented across your website and who are the owners and users there, start to give you an inventory of who those stakeholders truly are. And as we think about what to ask them as we're identifying their needs, better understanding what their solutions are that are being used, and then what data is needed by each solution. So this is where one of the first efficiencies is usually gained with a successful tag management implementation, because I'm not having to focus on let's start from square one to find the data that you need for X vendor, but I can actually go and start with a menu of options, really everything that's available in the data layer, and I can then choose to map individual elements onto my vendor of choice. So that way it saves me a great amount of development time from having to go and hunt and peck to find those data points. And then really, when we think about developing my management policies here, it's then about taking an inventory of those data sources and their requirements, and then determining at what point and on what page types and under what scenarios are those data layer elements really available. And this is potentially where you could matrix your inventory to understand what is my superset of all of my data layer, and under what conditions are those data layer elements available. And then it allows me to get into other areas, which we'll discuss more in a moment, around workflow and permission development. So who can originate requests, who approves, where's the chain of those requests and who plays a part in those, and are there policies that I need to put into place to make sure that proper governance is taking place? Are my end users allowed to do what they're supposed to do, but not allowed to potentially add in their own JavaScript or add in an unapproved vendor? You know, this is where things like a vendor management policy is really key, and something that certainly those of us who have the needs to ensure that only approved vendors that have gone through the proper processes are even available in my tag management solution to work. And this is where, again, tag management, and I will underscore this probably a couple times today, it's really important to think about this as not managing code, because tag management is about managing templates, not JavaScript code. In fact, when we start to think of ways to just inject JavaScript code via a container tag, that's where problems creep in. With Telium, one of our first things that we set out to do when we built what is today the world's largest tag management solution, we really wanted to focus on building as many templates as possible so that an end business user could go in and set up his or her own business requirements and map his or her own data mappings into that vendor. But more importantly, by building things into a template, it allows everyone in the organization to have visibility and not have to go and parse through individual JavaScript to understand what is actually going on here. And that becomes really important when we think about how my data is being handled and how my customer data is being passed along to other third parties. So now we'll talk a bit about training and onboarding. So as we talked about lots of different people within the organization, I typically like to think about these as three types of users, and you may have additional ones in your world, but we typically think about them as business or marketer, my analysts, the folks that maybe sit within my BI group or my web analytics team or my data science team, and then my technical team, the ones that are focused a bit more on site operations and site development. Now, a lot of us, and probably lots of you on the call today, are maybe a hybrid of some of these. you sit maybe within the marketing group, but you're focused primarily on data, or maybe you sit in the IT organization, but you're primarily focused on data. We see this all the time. But around you, there are certainly people that start to fall into a few different categories. And it's important when we think about those stakeholders and the people that are around those stakeholders, what roles are going to require training and onboarding? Not just the individuals that in this moment require training, but what are the roles that are really important in my organization to understand not only how our tag management solution works, but what our implementation strategy and objectives are and how our workflow and process is going to take place. So then we can break down our training into initial and ongoing. Initial really always built as part of your implementation and onboarding. But as you do this and as you go through this experience understanding how your tag management solution works, it's so important to outline the critical curriculum that's going to be used for future hires down the line. And this is something where I always love to outsource my work to other people. This is really where you can leverage your vendor and have your vendor help you put together not just the curriculum that you're going to use on day one of your tag management solution, but what is the package of either recorded content or on-demand or in-person content that your new hires and your new regions and new people that you bring into the tag management fold can go and do on their own so that they can understand how tag management as a product works while you then train them on how your company's processes and strategy come to be. And then for everyone, the ongoing training strategy around how we're going to identify the expansion plan as we introduce new people, new regions, and new stakeholders, important to make sure that they're incorporated into the training, and usually quarterly reviews of bringing these people together to talk about strategy, update, implementations, and new features are so key. Superheroes, and again, I'm going to take a guess here, probably most of you, since you chose to join today, this conversation, most of you are probably the superheroes within your organization, and you're the ones leading the charge. You know, tag management is not something that's been around for decades. This is something that has been identified by people that truly recognize that there's efficiencies and scale and opportunity for their organizations, and tag management is one of the ways to get there. So we're all great, you're great as superheroes, but it's always important to think about how do I make sure that the other people around me can scale operationally so that I can continue to fight the next battle out there and not have to start at square one every time a new request comes in. So the few things that we'll talk about here when it comes to scaling, it really relates to, you know, how do I bring more people in, and as that increase in requests and new opportunities arises, how do I actually meet that need? So one of the areas that may be, for some of us, important is for those of us that manage maybe more than one domain, brand, store, regions, microsites, any opportunity that you may have now or in the future to bring in new experiences and new potential teams into tag management, one of the things you may want to consider is a templated or library approach to tag management. So this is where the ability to create a predefined set of your data layer, your load rules, even your tag management implementations, as well as what users and workflows exist, can be created in, if we take an example of a regional site, can be created in one place and then really copied over or used as a library for each of my perhaps microsites or my regional sites that may follow a lot of the same standards because perhaps they have the same structure to the site, maybe they have the same URL structure and goal structure, and they use the same vendors. You want to make sure that you have a standard implementation there that not only meets the needs regionally, but meets the needs globally, but you'll then make some changes there. So if I have my standard site perhaps for the US, and then I want to roll that as a copy or a library to use for my UK site, there are certainly some standards that I want there, but then it will allow me to then work with the UK team so that they can then build upon that, but start with the same base implementation. So thinking about this, and again, leveraging your enterprise tag management vendor and their product to build a library and scalable approach is really important, because we're not trying to solve just the tidal wave that's coming in today, but we're really looking to build a foundation for the future. So let's talk a little bit about documentation. Before we get there, one of the things that I thought would be interesting and important to think about for a moment is what we kind of call the data supply chain. If we think about before tag management, the volumes and really the dizzying amount of data that flows throughout, it goes from the web page experience directly onto a vendor, and each one of those are implemented based on an implementation decision that was made at that day and time. When we move to a clean, more beautiful data that fuels all of your tag management vendors and is visible to everyone in the organization, it really allows you to think about data in a new way. It allows you to think about data as really part of a supply chain that includes lots of ways that customers are interacting with your brand, your company, and that's therefore generating data that flows to the data layer. And then it's then fueling not only different parts of my business, but all the different technologies and data strategies that flow throughout that can then help me gain better insights, help me better communicate with people within my organization since we have a common language in our data layer, and also allow me to fuel better experiences to my end users because I'm using tag management that allows this better flow back and forth, as opposed to without tag management or without this centralized strategy, every implementation is on its own and doesn't know how to talk to each other. If you kind of think about individual tag implementations speaking their own language, when they actually become part of a larger strategy and implemented through the same standard, they actually start to speak the same language to one another. So let's talk a little bit about some definitions and documentation. We hit on the data layer being one of the most important first steps here, and I included an example here, just a screenshot to again just underscore some of the types of data that exist here. We have these standard bundles that our customers will add in. I mentioned some of the e-commerce ones, which are key, but if you think about some of the other predefined baseline data points that really all sites have, you might have video data sources about what video is being played and what the state of that video is, individual site searches that happen, what's the keyword, what are the number of results, what page of the search results is somebody on. All of these things are really key to understanding the larger data strategy and the data layer. And it's really then important to think about this language is the language of your business, because this is not simply a description of a SKU or a description of something that comes from a vendor. Often it's defined by other technology, but it's really important to embrace what's currently being talked about, how you currently refer to things within the organization, and better define it, which we'll talk about in a moment. I thought I would make a little bit of a joke here, but a real world one. When I started my career, I worked in the news business, and we had really a data point called a slug. And for those of you that maybe haven't worked as much in PR and the news, you might wonder what the heck a slug is. So a slug is really just a name for an article or a piece. It's usually a shortened name. And we went through a data overhaul, and the word slug was not really known by the person that did the data overhaul, and so that got changed to an article ID. And then no one knew what it was anymore, and then it really wreaked havoc across the organization because everyone's used to the language because that's how they communicate with one another. So it's important when we think about defining the data layer, this is really how you think about things across the organization. Sometimes it's informed by technology, but sometimes it's really already informed by you. So I'll take another example when we think about our analytics solution. Maybe you have a product color is a particular data point that you have, but maybe the analytics group thinks about that as SPROP 14 or something. That's only specific to one group, but how is this something that translates and is available across the organization? That's really when defining the data layer becomes so important, because each one of these has a name, a description, an owner, a source, and a purpose. And without understanding clearly what those really are, it really introduces confusion along the way. So one other point that I wanted to hit on here when we talk about ownership, I alluded to at the beginning of the conversation the idea of, let's say my conversion value is perhaps owned by one particular group. Maybe the group that owned it, my e-commerce group or my analytics group built that because that's part of their analytics implementation, maybe a few others. It's very critical to them. But I certainly have other people in the organization that use that as well. Maybe my agency uses that value to gauge the effectiveness of the ad campaigns that they're running against the site to see how much value they're actually getting from those ads. So when we think about a great organization to working with data layer elements, the concept of labeling and looking at my resources and knowing who owns these becomes really important, not only to help keep me organized, but also giving me the ability to then lock down particular elements to make it something that maybe is available to all parts of the organization, but can only be changed by one. Because what you'd love to mitigate the issue is collision. What happens when somebody downstream says, oh, you know what, conversion value should really include tax, and then someone else says, you know, it really shouldn't include tax. If one of those makes a change, it then has downstream implications that are quite impactful. So as we mentioned, you know, tag management doesn't sit outside your workflow. It's really a living part of the process. And so as we think about multiple people that are in the organization making updates, this is where leveraging what works in your existing organization to document is important, plus giving the context and leveraging vendor notes and versioning inside of your tag management solution to have these two areas work together. I want to use one example here from, and it's actually one of my favorite examples, from one of our customers, Mason Companies, who presented earlier this year at our user conference. And they had their marketing stakeholder and their IT stakeholder on stage, and they talked about a lot of the same themes that we're talking about today and some of the struggles that they had before implementing tag management, a proper strategy around it, and how they were able to successfully communicate after it. And marketing was really, you know, looking at IT as being very static. IT was looking at marketing as being fluid, or perhaps a little too fluid. And what they found is by starting with definitions and finding a common language that they can work together and a process that works for both sides, they really found it a lot like a couples therapy, because you're finding the right way to communicate to meet the other's needs. And this, in the end, allowed them to cut down in half the number of web releases, because they're not having to go back and rework, as well as improve their speed to market. And that's really why we're all here. And finally, the last area that I wanted to go into was talking a little bit about the new feature process. So you're up, you've taken off, you're at 35,000 feet, you're at a great place. Where do new requests and new features and tag requests and all these great things then come into play? And this, again, leverages what works within your existing organization, but also allows tag management to do what it does well, which is to democratize data management across the organization to foster communication, to foster collaboration rather, but then communication really becomes key. So as you build your process documentation in your existing infrastructure, things like building templates and forms for request submissions, giving visibility throughout the organization, and ongoing communication then really are key to scalability. So let's think a little bit about successful iteration. So one of the things that we talked about with new people becoming a part of this data supply chain, they all come in with their own priorities, their own needs, their own knowledge of the process, or some may have more expertise than others. And so this is where making sure that your own internal documented processes for how you approach tag management becomes key, and giving a templated request form for those that maybe aren't a part of the process really is important to it. It helps you encourage process adoption and eliminates the fast forwarders or others that may simply not want to do work but forward it on to others. If you explain how the process works and allows them to actually get into it and work together, they will then know where to start and not have to come in with asking somebody else to do their work for you. And when we talk about request forms and things like that, we're not simply talking about something to request from somebody else, but it's really preparing that person who has something to implement, just makes them know what they should have when they get started. Do I need to have my vendor account ID? Do I need to have my data layer understanding before I walk in? What's my timeline? What is my success criteria? All these are really important so that I can think about how different aspects work together. And finally, considering things like team-based prioritization allows me for when there are elements of working together or when I have multiple people inside of the organization making updates at the same time, giving managers across the organization the ability to rank their own criteria for making updates inside of tag management, so that way they can communicate the larger picture across the organization, and perhaps giving the ability to leverage my tag management solution to be able to give me the ability to understand are multiple people making changes or making updates at the same time, and is there an ability for me to understand and get visibility into what other aspects of my team are actually inside of my tool. So with that, Pat, I will turn it over to you to continue on our 7 steps.
Awesome, thank you, Corey. There are a lot of great content, a lot of great takeaways for me, particularly having worked in this industry for a long time. I'm going to cover the last 3 points. The focus of that will be this point number 5, which is stability maintenance. And just to introduce myself again, I'm Patrick Hillery. I'm a solution consultant at ObservePoint. And stability maintenance really means QA. It really means keeping the data quality, as Adam mentioned, because really what we're all about is tracking and maintaining these tags for the end purpose of collecting quality data for our organization. And really, this is probably one of the biggest pain points I feel working in this industry and having worked in this industry for a long time. And I think the pain is getting greater with a lot of trends that we're seeing in the industry, with the amount of releases and the amount of changes and the fluid nature of the web in general. So imagine with me, if you will, for a second, that instead of us all being here for third-party tag management, let's just drop the third and the tag part of that and focus on just party management for a second. So I'm going to run through some best practices for party management. So one important thing is that you have a clear owner if you want a party to be executed in a certain way, and specifically if you want only a certain group of attendees to actually gain entrance to this party. You want to make sure you have security at every door, you guard all the doors, that everyone gets checked, that you have updated and accurate guest lists, that your security guards are trained to spot fake IDs and they check inside of bags and purses, and that everyone is on time. And of course, we're not here as party managers, we're here as third-party tag managers, and really this relates to this stability and QA management process. So I'm going to build this slide completely. I know there's a slight delay, so I'm just going to build this slide completely and then talk to each of these points. So one of the first things when thinking about maintaining the stability of our environment is having a clear owner, so having a data quality lead. A lot of organizations that I engage with will ask, should this person be in IT? Should this person be in analytics? Should they be an analyst? Should they be in marketing? And really, at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter where that person sits. It matters a lot more how the organization is aligned to support that role, and whether that person has been, or that group of people, because it doesn't need to be a single person, but whether that organization is aligned to support and help that person succeed in that role. And there needs to be alignment and communication. Everyone needs to know, specifically the development and IT teams need to know who that role is. And it could be, as I mentioned, a different person for each development team or each product area or each platform. So we also need to be very aware of the code change mechanisms. So how changes make it into our production environment, or how you gain access to the party. The two main doors that we manage right now are the tag management based releases, and then also the development based releases. And these are likely, if you're in an agile environment, part of your sprint cycles. And then so all deployments need to be checked for third party tag integrity. Oftentimes there are exceptions made and things sneak through, and that's really the main opportunity for affecting the stability of our environment. We also need to provide accurate documentation, so that way folks know what they should be looking for. So this person that is in this data quality lead has the right information and knows what they're looking for and what's expected and what's not expected. Also, our environment is becoming more complex. Data leakage is a situation where maybe we have some tags that have been deployed in the past, and maybe the relationship with that vendor is no longer up to date or current, and someone hasn't taken the time to actually remove those tags from our website. Or maybe in another situation, someone has demoed a tag or a vendor and has thrown up some tags for a short amount of time, and then also never took the opportunity to take those tags off of our site. And this vendor is still continuing to collect data even though there isn't a formal relationship. And then also tags are becoming more complex. There's piggybacking scenarios where maybe you deploy one tag with the intention of just having that one tag go into your production website. But then other tags are loaded as a result of loading that one tag. And QA needs to be planned for. This isn't something that you can show up for at the last minute and hope that it happens and hope that things are successful. As part of every release, there needs to be actual time allocated for this particular resource. So I'm going to walk through 3 types of changes that can happen to our website or mobile app and define how we can manage this QA process and actually give you some practical tips. So this first type of change, it relates to having your third-party tags and data layer stay the same, but actually the layout, features, and functionality change. So in this situation, it relates to a lot of CMS-based changes where you have a CMS that maybe allows you to push content, and maybe even without involving actual development and code writing. So these are this type of change is happening more and more frequently within our environments. So in this situation, what you want to do is you want to record a baseline and capture all of the tags and all of the variables that are associated with that baseline. And you want to take that baseline and you want to, after the deployment, compare that to the newly published or the newly created site after those layout changes have happened. And you want to make sure that the tags that were there in place and all the variables that were there in place are still present. And so you want to basically do what's commonly referred to as regression testing and make sure that those variables and those vendors haven't regressed to an inferior state to where they were after. So the question is how do you do that, practically speaking? And I'll give you 2 basic types of options. So the first one is to manually approach this. So to use some widely available tools that are public and in some cases free. So probably the most popular is to use a proxy tool like Charles or Fiddler. The great things about these tools is that they allow you to capture multiple navigations or a series of events all into one one interface. And some other options include your just browser console, the network tab, which is monitoring the network tab. If you do use that and you're gathering data from multiple pages, you'll want to make sure that you persist so that each time you navigate to a new page that the data isn't cleaned out and wiped out. There's also browser plugins that are available. Then there's also some JavaScript bookmarks. The key to all of these different methods is that you're actually navigating on your laptop through the pages or the content that you want to QA or that you want to check to see if there are any issues. And obviously, there's a limit to how many pages you can practically gather data for. And so that's where this next area of QA really comes into place, and that is automation and using a data quality assurance technology. ObservePoint is one of many data quality assurance technologies that can solve this type of problem. I'll speak specifically to ObservePoint because it's the technology obviously that I'm most familiar with. So in order to record a baseline and to be able to have that snapshot of what's currently implemented and what you want to have as your baseline for this regression, is you'll just need to enter one or many URLs. You'll want to add any actions, so those are specific things or elements on the page that you want the engine to interact with. And then you simply let it run and it'll automatically capture the baseline, and it can do this at scale either on a small subset of pages or thousands or hundreds of thousands of pages. And then you want to save that snapshot, which the engine does automatically. And then you can rerun that save baseline against the staging and you'll be notified of any difference. So in certain use cases, it'll actually do the differential, the regression testing automatically. Whereas I failed to mention on the previous slide, you're doing the comparison manually. So in some cases, you're just grabbing two tabs and navigating or toggling between those two tabs and saying, this was what was here before and this is what here is after, and doing a visual scan. And obviously leveraging an automated tool that does that for you, it can be very precise, is a much more efficient use of time. So the second type of change, and one that's probably a little bit more likely for an actual sprint cycle release where there's new functionality and there's additional third-party tags or additional variables inside of any of those tags to match that change of functionality and feature. In this situation, very similar process. You again record the baseline, and then you compare the published or the released, likely on a pre-production environment, and compare that with what you had prior. And in this case, instead of expecting ideally a perfect match and no regression, we're going to expect some differences. And so this is where our documentation is really going to come into play, as Adam mentioned. Really look at those differences and say, are they expected? Was this part of the plan? Was this additional variable or this additional vendor that appears on this page or subset of pages, is that expected? And again, going into how to approach this. So again, you can manually do this with some of the tools that I mentioned earlier, but I'll focus on the automated process. So there's a very similar process using a data quality assurance solution. You again record the baseline, so you enter the URLs, you add the actions, you automatically capture the baseline, and then you have the option to add additional expectations. And this is where you can even take the documentation even before maybe your new site is ready or the changes are ready, and you can add those expectations. So you can say on this page or on this URL, I'm going to expect this additional tag, or I'm going to expect these additional variables, and whether that's evars or props or custom data elements inside of Google Analytics or any other vendor, you can then pre-populate and prime your engine so that when you rerun it, it can analyze the differences again, and it can automatically notify you of any potential changes. So the third use case will be an actual brand new site development. So instead of recording the baseline and comparing it, we actually don't have a baseline, so we won't record it. So in this case, we're just going to take the actual data from the brand new site, and we're just going to compare it again to our documentation. So there won't be an initial kind of regression. It's just going to be a first check. And again, there's some manual ways that you can just gather that data that's associated with a vendor using the manual techniques that I mentioned earlier. And also, you can use an automated data quality assurance engine. So in this case, you can document the expectations from the beginning, and then you simply run the data quality engine and you can get notified of any of the differences. You can also just simply use the engine for data collection and skip that first step of documenting the expectations and just gather the data and automate that step of the process, and then you can manually analyze the results and compare that with the documentation like you would normally. So hopefully those use cases will be helpful. I know that prior to coming to ObservePoint, that this is something that I spent a lot of time really helping an organization align their resources to successfully accomplish this. It was also something that I did personally. And discovering the automation, a data quality automation engine has really been an eye-opening and a really fun opportunity for myself to really see how we can improve this step in the process as an industry. So the next step is production monitoring. So this talks specifically about after the QA, so after code has been released into production, how are things performing and how are things behaving in my production website? And there's two real reasons why we'd want to do that. So the first is that we'll want to detect implementation errors quickly. And as a consultant, I have been privy to many situations where errors have gone undetected for long periods of time. And ultimately what that means is that data about our business is lost, and fundamental decisions about what direction or how to spend marketing dollars are lost. And that's really the main goal of why we need to keep stability, and why we, if there are errors, we need to be able to detect and react quickly to them. The other reason is to monitor third-party tag performance and make sure our websites are now not 100% dependent on our own IT internal infrastructure. So many pieces of the website are now outsourced to vendors and provide critical roles that there's no longer a single source for performance improvement. It's now a group effort, and you can monitor and be on top of how those tags are performing. So you might be thinking, well, Patrick, we just spent a bunch of time talking about QA, and I'm going to spend a bunch of time QAing, so I really shouldn't have to worry about monitoring in production because I'm not going to have any errors in production. It's just as simple as that. And I agree with you, but the reality is, and I think that's a great principle to have, but the reality is that there are always exceptions, right? So back to the party planner. If LeBron James shows up at your door, he's not on the guest list, you're still going to let him in. At least I would hope that security guards would still let him in. Same thing in our organizations. If an executive comes to your desk and says, we need this pushed right now, this is affecting revenue, I don't care if we haven't checked all of the third-party tags yet, let's get this out and we'll make any fixes afterwards. That's a real scenario, and that happens all the time. And those opportunities are gonna present holes for data quality issues. So in addition to releases going out without QA, there's also new browser versions that are released. Google also can announce changes that can affect our data, or other large vendors. There's also new devices that are released that without our code change can still affect the type and the amount of data that we're collecting. And as I mentioned, from a performance standpoint, traffic volumes change, and some tags that may be performant at lower traffic volumes or at off-peak hours may not be performant and may have a negative impact on customer experience towards the high peak or the high volume traffic hours. So now how do we monitor and how do we stay on top of our production environment? So for third-party tags and variables, again, we're going to use a data quality assurance platform, something that can go out there, can look at a large volume of pages in an automated fashion, and can bring back key pieces of data for me. And I like to break that up into two different areas. So for our KPIs, so for those critical pieces of our website that drive our business, whether it's a purchase flow for a retailer or a lead generation for a large business, those key areas of our site, and usually you can narrow that down to a small group of pages or templates that represent the majority of our business. In those situations, you'll want to schedule, in my opinion, at least daily audits to collect data about those pages. And then for the broader website, you'll want to schedule full quarterly audits that will go out and capture a full scan or a full audit of your website. And then for third-party tag performance, likely inside of IT you have performance monitoring function and tools. And simply, if you're not already aligned, you can align those to your to specifically target third-party tag performance. And this is also a data point that comes out of data quality assurance platforms as well. So the last point, which kind of brings everything together, is IT and business partnering, and making sure that you have a great relationship with all those organizations. As Adam mentioned throughout his presentation, there's a lot of opportunity to really build and strengthen that relationship with IT, because they are a critical piece of what we're trying to accomplish. But what I want to focus on is taking the time to document and communicate out those wins that you intended to solve, or those wins that you intended to have as a result of purchasing a tag management solution and a data quality insurance platform. Things like time to resolve issues, the number of issues deployed into production, the page performance, and the actual time spent within your organization. These are all critical parts of a tag management solution data quality platform's pitch to say, this is why you should purchase these platforms, and this is why we can positively impact your business. And in my experience, the impact can be significant if you take the time to document it and share it. Resolve issues. Most organizations prior to a TMS and data quality assurance can take several weeks or even months to identify and actually solve data quality issues. A lot of companies can go from having multiple issues every single deployment to having the occasional issue a few times here and there. Page performance, I just threw out 500 milliseconds, but you need to try your best to identify and quantify that improvement by moving some tags maybe that were loading synchronously to asynchronous, or taking off vendors that shouldn't have been there by doing a full scan and locating things that weren't very performant. And hopefully, most importantly, that you can take that QA function that sometimes can take days and hopefully solve that in a matter of hours. And being competent and being able to skillfully manage these tasks, it's going to breed confidence, and you're going to gain trust, and be able to efficiently meet the timelines that are set by IT, for example. And all these relationships, they're critical for data quality. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, and being able to more efficiently run our businesses. So, thanks for your time today. That was the 7 steps that I ran through.
All right, thanks, Pat. So as you mentioned, those are the 7 steps that he ran through. We're pretty short on time. Looks like we have just a couple minutes for Q&A, so we'll go through 1 or 2 questions and kind of see what we have here. First question we have is for Pat. It says, Pat, you mentioned manual ways to audit tags. What are some solutions for someone just getting started with tag QA?
Yeah, so those are going to be the solutions that I mentioned. A proxy debugger, specifically Charles Proxy and Fiddler, are the 2 most common that I've been exposed to. So those are, you can download both of those on a trial basis and start using them immediately. They essentially become a proxy or a go between your browser and a web server, and can record and capture all the traffic that's associated with loading a web page. So that would be a great place to start.
Awesome. All right, so we have one for Adam now, specifically regarding just mobile tagging. The question is, how do you plan for tagging on mobile apps? Are there any special considerations?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think with mobile, mobile is really akin in a lot of ways to traditional software because you have things like the App Store from Apple or from Google that you have to submit to, and it's more of a traditional approach. And you might also at the same time have more scrutiny because of the development cycle as well as the way that mobile apps are architected, you may not want to load as many technologies directly in. You may want to leverage other collection mechanisms, such as having your tag management solution collect and proxy on information to your analytics vendor or to other places that need it, because it's really, in a lot of ways, a different beast altogether. But certainly, I think having that conversation both internally and with your tag management vendor around just the environmental differences between web and mobile, so that way you can understand and plan for that, but at the same time making sure that you're following the same fundamentals, building your data layer, building your data approach, and the larger picture around how you handle that data to fuel further insights.
All right, thanks, Adam. It looks like we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to end Q&A there. If we got a question from you, we'll reach out via email to make sure you get an answer to that. Just as a reminder, we do have some offers. You can go to observepoint.com and get a free website audit where we'll help identify holes in your web tag deployment. Or also you can check out Telium and their tag management system at their website. There's actually resources in the handout section for just the product overviews if you're interested in that. And with that, we'll call this a wrap, and we thank you guys for your time and have a great day.